Hello, I'm Ralph Ferguson, Managing Director of the TTU Ethics Center. Welcome to the 4th Annual Faculty, Staff, Student Ethics Symposium. Let me first thank the judges that evaluated the research. Dr. Mike Ryan, Rawls Business College of Business, Dr. Muketis Dawish, Whitaker College of Engineering, Dr. Dwight McDonald, Law School, and Ms. Anastasia Coles of the Ethics Center. And let me go on to thank the staff. The staff for planning and setting up this symposium for us. Ms. Laura Lopez for her work, Ms. Lisa James, Mr. Tay Wynn, and again, Ms. Anastasia Coles. All these individuals had a key role in from start to finish in this process, and it's just it's taken off and it's doing wonderfully well, and we greatly appreciate what the Ethics Center staff has done. This program encourages participants to address ethical challenges related to their discipline. Thank you for submitting your research to the symposium. As we evolve the symposium, eventually we would like to graduate into becoming a think tank where we look at critical issues and even do white papers. And this is just the embryonic start of this process. And I appreciate all of you submitting your papers and letting us review them. And Dr. Ryan will take and have you announce your speaking and give your bio statement, and provide your bio statement. And then at the close, Dr. Ryan will identify the way each group was ranked, both students and faculty. Now, let me move on to introduce an outstanding scholar and chairperson of our advisory committee, Dr. Dennis Patterson, who has been very supportive of our initiative and clearly understands the vision of the Ethics Center. Dr. Patterson.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. This is my pleasure to be part of this amazing organization. And it's been a tremendous run of successes, and I'm very, very happy to be part of this, and I'm looking forward to this amazing program. Let me just say that we live in an age today where ethics, I can't remember in my unfortunately very long lifetime so far, that where ethics is more important now than ever before, particularly in the age in which we live. And I just want to say that I have, under Dr. Ferguson's leadership, it's been my pleasure to watch this organization grow and become more and more important, and to watch its presence on this campus become more visible and more people recognize just how important the work is that's being done here. And this program that we're going to enjoy today is going to be reflective of that. And I just want to say thank you for letting me be part of this. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and I look forward to an amazing program. That's all I've got to say for now.
Good morning. This is Mike Ryan. So I have the pleasure of introducing the speakers shortly, but before that, I'd like to reiterate what Dr. Ferguson mentioned. The staff in his group have done a phenomenal job, especially when we start to look at what they were faced with in these last few weeks, trying to compile this or put this program together in a virtual mode and get everybody to participate speaks volumes in terms of their commitment to what tech is all about. And I think that from an ethics standpoint, this is critical. We live in, as Dr. Patterson just mentioned, an age where ethics is so important. Our involvement with each other is so important that we have to look at it from every angle. And what pleases me as I reviewed some of the papers, and I didn't review all the papers, but I reviewed some of the papers, is the way the papers addressed different issues, all of which touch upon ethics in our time. So we're going to start today with the faculty papers first, and then we'll move on afterwards to the student papers. So our first paper is going to be presented by Dr. Cordella Barria, I don't know if I pronounced that properly, and I apologize if I messed up on it. Dr. Barrier is an associate professor of English at Texas Tech. She co-directs the Literature of Social Justice and the Environment, which is abbreviated LSJE. It's an initiative that specializes in Latinx literatures in the American Southwest. Her work highlights the need to disrupt mythologies of the American West by incorporating border voices and identities, and concentrates on the literature of social justice and environment. Her current book project, The Haunted Borderlands, Towards an Ethics of Place, explores space, place, and politics of haunting in the American Southwest. And I particularly am looking forward to this because certainly from the perspective of Texas Tech, where we're located, this has got to be something that addresses our community. So Dr. Barrier, if you would please.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. You got it kind of close. It's Barrera. But I'm going to jump right in. My talk is pretty much exactly 5 minutes, give or take a few seconds. So I am going to read so that I stay right on track at 5 minutes. Once again, great to be here. Great to see all these friendly faces. My essay begins with a story about my father and my family's ties to our Texas homeland. I recall conversations that we had when I was in high school in my hometown of Laredo, which for those of you not familiar is on the border between Mexico and the United States. These conversations focused around my great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather, Manuel Barrera, and my father as heir to an original Spanish land grant in Jim Wells County called La Tinaja de Lara. Other Mexican-American descendants of these grants, now called the Texas Land Grants, during this time, which was the early 1980s, were petitioning in partnership with the Texas Claimants Association that they were eligible to claim certain monies Mexico accepted responsibility of owing due to an exchange of debts with the treaty signed by the US and Mexico in November of 1941. I don't think my father, who traced his lineage to Old Spain, ever imagined that he would reclaim ownership of this plot of land. It was something else that he desired. After pushing through bureaucratic channels for a few years, he finally gave up the ghost that was La Tinaja. And in the end, he acceded that any land his family had once had a legal claim to had been so permanently altered by Anglo dispossession, commercial farming, agribusiness, and rampant growth that no amount of idealism, radical idealism, could get it back. To me, he embodied a kind of isolationism, as throughout his life he remained oriented by a future that was only possible by recalling the past. His memories of what La Tinaja de Lara meant to his father had left a hole in his history, he said. He was haunted, he said. This was something I couldn't understand at the time. How could he be haunted by a loss he never directly experienced? The poet Sabine Ulibarri encapsulates the significance of the land, La Tierra, to Mexican Americans, mestizas and mestizos, and indigenous cultures in the American Southwest. He writes, "The land is sacred because your parents and grandparents are buried there. Some of your children are buried there, and you will be buried there. The sweat, blood, and tears of generations have filtered into the land. It is holy, sacred, sacrosanct." And it's this ethical connection to place, what Marxist scholar Raymond Williams calls structure of feeling, that embeds in places of origin a basis and orientation for continued belief. And so it's this structure of feeling tied to a collective past that I argue can shape an ethics of landscape. When we recognize the claims that others, namely our ancestors, have upon our bodies in the present, we can work towards illuminating the paradox of abusive systems of power and dispossession that continue to haunt our bodies and return via memory and narrative. In my writing and teaching about the American Southwest, I discuss place alongside space as ways to experience the world. In social and cultural geography, place signifies security and attachment, especially attachment to the past. Space is future-oriented and speaks to vast spaces to be filled. It is a quality tied to manifest destiny. In the literature of the American Southwest, we find characters who signify aspects of space. For example, the cowboys in the works of Cormac McCarthy or Larry McMurtry, who are left wandering, adrift in time and space due to a necessary lack of connection to the past. Conversely, in works by Indigenous and Mexican-American authors such as Leslie Silko or Gloria Anzaldúa, characters often have to home in or return to places of origin to find a basis of belief as well as move forward. In my book project, The Haunted Borderlands, I look at people like my father and fictional characters who were haunted by or embody aspects of what Indigenous and Mexican American scholars call return and recovery. These individuals long for a place or a homeland that has been made invisible or obsolete by the brutal amnesias that states and governments contrive to erase their own atrocities. Understanding the political force of haunting, which Avery Gordon and Michel Foucault similarly describe as subjugated, marginalized, and disqualified forms of knowledge, is one way to understand how individuals negotiate spaces of memory and avenues of associative remembering to uncover cultural scripts that can resituate the histories and mythologies of cultures and people that have been effectively silenced by official doctrines and policies such as manifest destiny. Doing so breaks open modes of restoration as well as speaks to the broader moral obligation we must inculcate in the 21st century as we search for more sustainable ways of being in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pereira. And that was very insightful. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Dwayne Hoover. Dwayne is a full professor of practice and a member of the graduate faculty of the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech. He has a PhD in management and organizational behavior from Washington University, St. Louis, where he was mentored by Walter Nord. Dr. Hoover's research interests include management education for skills, acquisitions, vicarious experiential learning, organizational and management theory, and sociological aspects of the Burning Man Project. In particular, what Dwayne brings to academics is not just a pure academic study. He knows how to bridge the gap between academics and practice. And so I'm proud that Dwayne is part of our area of management faculty, and I welcome you to the podium.
Yeah, I want to kind of frame what I'm doing here. This is the title of my piece is Requisite Variety in Ethical Decision Making. And what I'm talking about here is not really ethics per se, but the capacity to engage in ethical behavior. And I'm using a framework of requisite variety to explain that from the perspective of the decision maker, the person who is deciding to engage or not engage in a particular behavior. Let me start by defining real simply what requisite variety is and how it works. Imagine that you're building geometric figures and you have some matchsticks and you want to make figures. And you have 2 matchsticks, you can only make a line with that. Now you have 3 matchsticks, you can make a triangle. If you have 3 matchsticks, you can make a triangle, but you can never make a square. If you have 4 matchsticks, you can make a square and know that you also can make a triangle because the requisite variety of 4 encompasses the requisite variety of 3 in this particular case. So that's a real simple example of how the requisite variety works. So let's talk about a particular actor. A person has the capacity, you can compare decision matrices of different decision makers based on the requisite variety capacity that they have. A decision maker with a lower level of requisite variety has a more limited range of choices, ethical choices in this case. A person with a higher level of requisite variety has a higher range of alternatives available. By the way, I don't see my face, if that's okay. I don't care. So let's talk, let me give you a specific example. I have a 5-level model, if you would, of ethical relationships to environmental issues being like climate change, pollution, and so on and so forth. And as I go up the list, I'll be going into higher levels of requisite variety. So in level 1, the lowest level, environmental forces are seen as random. This is an incapacity to diagnose the environment. Level 2 is environmental forces are seen as magic. This is sometimes found in more primitive cultures, for example. And this is based on a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, a famous quote. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And my modification of that is, any significantly enhanced technology is indistinguishable from magic according to the perceiver's level of requisite variety. So at level 2, if the environment is seen as magical, and the concept of environmental damage doesn't really come into play because it's not part of the magic framework. Level 3, environmental forces are seen as subject to a level of management, but not really subject to control. Environmental damage is recognized as a factor. We know we're doing things bad, but addressing it's beyond the technological control of meaningful management. This is where the United States was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Level 4 is where we're...
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. You gave me extra time. I appreciate that. Level 4 is where we can control it to some extent. Environmental damage can be brought under control. However, now we have a choice. So in level 5, the ideal would be the environment is embraced as a co-inhabiting partner with humankind. In other words, humankind views the world as symbiotically, it's symbiosis combined with the planet itself. Now, let me give you an example of pollution. A person at level 2, magical thinking, can't really address the question of pollution. So if you talk about a person who's operating at that level, is it fair to call them unethical when they're engaging in pollution activities when they don't really understand what it is? A level 4 person, on the other hand, does have the capacity to engage in pollution control. And if he chooses or she chooses to do it, we could describe that as ethical behavior. On the other hand, if they deliberately choose to not do it for whatever nefarious reason they might have, we could describe them as unethical. And my summary point is that often we judge people as being ethical or unethical in their behavioral choices without really fully understanding the perspective of the decision maker themselves. And a person is only capable of doing what they're capable of doing. Another way of saying that is people don't know what they don't know, and they also don't know that they don't know it. So when we're looking at ethical behavior, we need to put it in perspective of the person engaging. Now, what's the solution? 10 seconds. The solution is enlightenment. The solution is education. The solution is to help people increase their level of perception and understanding so they can operate at higher levels. That's my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dwayne. I appreciate that. And I think that's very insightful, that ethics is something that is not a hard and fast rule, but instead is dependent upon the persons involved. Our next speaker is Dr. Daniel Kelly. Dr. Kelly is an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Psychology and Leadership and an affiliate faculty in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Texas Tech. Dr. Kelly's main research interest is using the integration of technology to enhance the educational and employment outcomes of at-risk and underrepresented student populations in a STEM context. His primary population of interest is children in foster care and other non-parental custody. Currently, Dr. Kelly is concentrating his focus on investigating ways to increase STEM education participation among underrepresented groups. He has active grant-funded research from the National Science Foundation, the Texas Educational Agency, and several local foundations investigating online active learning for at-risk engineering students, personalized learning in K through 12 classrooms, and robotics education for children with autism. He is the president-elect for the Southeast Technology Education Conference and chair of the CTETE Teacher Preparation Committee. Dr. Kelly is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Foster Care and the associate editor of the Engineering Design Graphics Journal. Dr. Kelly, I welcome you to the podium, and I'm very interested in what you have to say about these programs.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate I'm able to present from from my current circumstances. I'm unable to share the screen, so I'm just going to walk through the presentation and kind of describe the couple of visuals that I had up. So the paper, and I hope you read that itself, because it goes in a lot more detail than I can possibly go into in 5 minutes. But talking about ethical considerations and recommendations for research involving children in foster care, specifically around informed consent and assent and why foster youth have different needs. Talking about the categories under the current regulations and why foster youth are a separate category, should be a separate category for IRB. And I'm going to, just for the purpose of this, focus on the federal regulations and Texas law. So currently we have 3 groups that I want to talk about that are protected under IRB, and that's children, wards, and prisoners. And although foster children, yes, they are kids, but they have differences in who can consent to what. Guardian is a very loosely defined term, so a lot of our informed consent documents say, you know, have your parent or guardian, you know, read this and sign this, but that's not necessarily what guardian means in this context. We have limited knowledge of the child's history. That's physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, and their best interest is not always considered. And because of these issues, there's specific considerations that should be given to this very special and limited group of children. The normal non-foster youth consent assent pathway, and this was the visual, is quite simple. We go from the researcher, we get informed consent from the parent, we get assent from the child, and then we do our research. In the foster youth pathway, that's quite different. We often have foster parents, we have kinship providers, and we have group home staff, and those have that physical custody of the child, but they are not necessarily, depending on the role, able to consent to certain things, or in the case of kinship, at all, somebody at church. Then we have CPS, who has a strong role. They have an appointed guardian ad litem, they have an attorney, and then their birth parent still has rights, especially for research when it's related to medical trials, vaccines. In fact, in the state of Texas, you can't change a child's hairstyle without written consent from a birth parent, although you can get a tattoo, which is a little strange. And then we can do some research. The way that, and I want to talk specifically about prisoners here in a comparison to from foster kids to prisoners, that many foster kids actually enter their families through contact with law enforcement. Even if it's not a police officer, it's a badged employee of CPS. And foster youth are designated in the custody and under the protection of the state, regardless of the reason for placement. So if the parents, for neglect, lose custody of their children, the kids are now in the custody of the state, even if, and there's little dissimilarity in the perception of that child, especially in a group home setting, between themselves and prisoners. And identical legal terminology such as protective custody, ward of the state, and remanded into custody are used for both prisoners and foster youth. Additionally, there's a lack of control and consent in the environment in which they live. They are not able to make decisions for themselves. And in limited circumstances in court, somebody is representing their interests, but they're often not represented personally by coercion risk. The third category is wards of the state, which are covered under the regulations, and foster children are included unless they have a foster parent, a guardian, a relative with physical custody, which is kinship care, including fictive kin, if they have a surrogate parent, guardian ad litem, court-appointed advocate, or other appointed person, which in the state of Texas is always, and in every state, there's a guardian appointed. So even though they're wards of the state, there's a very limited window in which they're actually covered under the ward of the state category under IRB. And foster kids are unique. There's additional concerns and barriers that are not present in non-foster children. Familial structure is generally significantly different, even though many are placed in a quote unquote nuclear family. There's many perceptual, physical, and legal similarities from foster youth to prisoners. There's an increase, as I said, coercion risk. 60% of sex trafficked individuals in the state's children are foster youth. 80% of prison inmates are former foster youth, which goes to then the reasons for that go to why they're a coercion risk. They're not considered wards, and in my opinion, need additional protections under IRB, or at least considerations in research for clean. So I think that's my 5. I think I made it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly. I find that very informative. It's something many of us probably don't think about, simply because it's not something we're exposed to. So it's very insightful. At this point, we're going to move on to the student-submitted papers. We're going to start off with Matthew Stressman and his co-author, Joe Milliken. Matt has a background in physics and business, and over the last 6 years, he's taught as a teaching assistant and a graduate part-time instructor at Texas Tech. He's also taught at a local private school for 2 years, and certainly has an interest in ethics. Now, you can attest to that, as he was just in my leadership and ethics class, and did very well, by the way. His co-author, Joseph Milliken, graduated in 2019 with honors from Texas Tech with a Bachelor of Arts in Honors, Arts and Letters, and wrote his undergraduate thesis titled The Affordable Care Act and Its Impact on Rural Healthcare, with business administration in the STEM program from Texas Tech Rawls College of Business, with the purpose of seeking a career in healthcare administration. He's currently a financial analyst with Covenant Health Partners in Lubbock, Texas. So Matt, welcome to the podium, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say after that great class that you took this semester.
Well, I will go ahead and start off by saying my name's Matthew Stressman. I'll let Joseph go ahead and introduce himself real quick.
Yes, my name is Joseph Milliken.
Okay. And so jumping back, the reason why we actually submitted this paper was because of Dr. Ryan's class. So we can say thank you so much for actually telling us about this competition, because we wouldn't have even thought about this. And this was a great chance to go ahead and kind of dust off some of the dust that was settling on our ethical decision-making processes. We'd both taken ethics classes with Dr. Schaller back when he was still at Tech, and we both really enjoyed them. So as soon as we heard about this, we were like, this is definitely something we want to pursue. I kind of want to get into a little bit of the background, because I think that helps inform why we approached the project the way we did. But like my introduction said, I've been teaching for quite a while, specifically at Texas Tech. And while there, I've noticed that there's been a rampant amount of cheating. And what I've noticed is that students are getting more and more bold about how they cheat. And so there was some interest on my part and on Joseph's part also as to what was motivating this desire to go out and cheat. And based off of that, hopefully one day someone can come in and try to come up with an idea of how to go out and prevent cheating. We found that there was a lot of different ideas, and that a lot of people had done some really good analysis. So what we decided we wanted to do was actually go through from a Kantian ethics perspective and from a utilitarian perspective, and try to figure out what was going on behind some of the motivations, and see if we could come up with a logical reason why students would cheat. What we ended up finding was that it was a little bit more difficult than you would hope, but that there was still a lot of valuable stuff to go ahead and learn. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Joseph so that he can talk a little bit about some of that stuff also.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was fascinating about the psychology behind using Chegg is that versus something as if like cheating on a test versus, copying someone's homework, that Chegg is a service that students purchase. So there's actually a transaction that occurs, in order to gain this advantage per se. Now, the original creation of Chegg and the original understanding behind why Chegg was created is not necessarily an unethical one. Being able to share information almost in the context that we have here, it is not an unethical dilemma. But what becomes an unethical dilemma is what we end up finding with students in general, and just almost the psychology behind it is that when there is an accessibility to easy information, students end up gravitating towards that, and that's why we see a large amount of Chegg cheating in this university. I mean, me and Matthew can tell you just from experience, and I'm sure many of the professors will be able to attest to this, that cheating or even the online quizzes and people sharing information on Chegg is prolific. But do we think that this is a something that is fixable? Absolutely. And one of the things that we hope to bring about with this paper, or even bring to light, is that it comes down to the core of the motivation behind why students get an education, and that is to not only improve their technical skills, their intellectual skills, but also for the universities as well. We believe that if you're able to reduce not just cheating, but also this sharing of information in an unethical manner through Chegg, universities will have a greater reputation, because students will come out of universities having a way more solid background, even if they have lower grades, because they've actually put the work in. They didn't get this information in the wrong way. They actually earned their way through their degree.
So one other thing that I do want to mention, we tried to make a distinction between a short-term benefit that the student gets versus a long-term effect that it has on society. And one of the things that we strongly believe is that the problem is that students see the short-term effect as being a benefit to themselves, but they don't see the long-term effects that go ahead and actually kind of tear apart society. So they don't get to see those negative effects on any reasonable time scale, which ends up causing them to just think that it doesn't exist. And so one of the goals has to be to solve this issue, to go ahead and try to help them see that the long-term effects do matter for everyone, including themselves. And so we believe that we can come up with that way as a society of learners, that we will end up helping education significantly over time. With that, we did want to say thank you. It's an honor to be able to present to you guys, and it's been really a fun process.
Matt, Joseph, thank you. You made me proud. And actually, this might dovetail nicely with what Dr. Hoover was talking about earlier before, in terms of the requisite knowledge that the individuals have, and how we might help them gain more insight into the situation. Our next student speaker is Blaine Pearson. Blaine has his MBA, and he's a certified financial planner. He's a PhD student and graduate part-time instructor in Texas Tech University's Personal Financial Planning Program, where he teaches the graduate and undergraduate personal financial planning capstone courses. Blaine's primary research interests include the empirical analysis of factors related to financial planner use, normative analysis of household financial decisions, and demographic variation in financial behavior. Blaine is expected to graduate in the fall of 2020 and hopes to pursue an academic career. Blaine, I look forward to financial planning. Is always something that's interesting. Right now, I would imagine you're overwhelmed with some aspects.
It's certainly a different environment with everything going on. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart in the financial planning space. And specifically, I did this paper to look at the level of disclosure in the financial advising space, and whether or not the financial planning industry should be intentional in disclosing the practice violations of financial planners. And the motivation for this paper came from an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal this past summer that found that 6,300 CFP professionals or certified financial planners had practice violations that were not recorded on CFP Board's website, letsmakeaplan.com, which is a website that clients and potential clients can go on to search for financial advisors and search for who they decide to work with. And this kind of begged the question of, what is the level of organizational responsibility for disclosure and transparency in the financial planning industry? We have, the CFP board, individuals searching for financial advisors, and of course, not listing the violations and past history of those advisors. So just a little bit of background, what is a CFP? So a CFP is the most recognized designation in financial planning. To technical competency, 68% are successful getting and passing the exam on the first try, and then 46% for repeat test takers. 7% of the test covers the CFP board's code of ethics, and then in order to maintain the CFP designation, there's a continuing education requirement, and part of that is to complete ethics training as well. So on the CFP board's website, when asked, why do you choose a certified financial planner, one of the first lines I wanted to highlight was just about anyone can use the title financial planner. And so only those that have fulfilled the CFP board's requirements can call themselves a CFP or certified financial planner professional. And so again, it relists those requirements about strict ethical standards. You have to have years of experience, pass the comprehensive exam, all these things just to be even use the credentialing. And so the last line in this screen here is, you should feel confident knowing that with a certified financial planning professional, you're working with someone committed to providing the high standard of financial planning. And so why did the CFP board not disclose is a big issue. And so the first kind of bullet point is, financial planning is a credence good. So this means it's kind of hard to evaluate quality, and it's not like getting a haircut where you can tell whether or not you had a bad haircut. It's kind of difficult to get whether or not you've had a good financial planner. So this presents an opportunity for asymmetric information where individuals are working with an advisor they don't have the full picture of. And so also financial planning is different than other professions like the legal or medical professions. As shown on the CFP board website, anybody can call themselves financial planners. There are no formal licensing requirements like an attorney or a doctor. And so in the absence of a sort of licensing requirement, or in the absence of some of these judgments and evaluating quality, individuals look to signals of market quality. And so, for example, the CFP establishes a minimum knowledge threshold and ethical threshold. So consumers are looking for some signal to show that they are working with a competent financial advisor. So the question and sort of that I kind of had as a follow-up, why don't consumers just Google this? Well, I use data from the NFCS, or the National Financial Capability Study, because they have a specific line item in there that asks survey participants whether or not they've heard of any of the following consumer tools: Broker Check, the IAPD, or the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure, the EDGAR, the Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis, and Retrieval Database. And turns out, I'm only going to go through, for the sake of time, these first three points here, that only about 14.5% have heard of Broker Check, only about 13% have heard of the IAPD, and a little bit more for EDGAR at 21.44%. So all of this to show that there is not a lot of individuals don't know the resources about where they need to go to understand access, whether or not the advisor they've worked with. So I ran a probate regression too, just on the demographic variables, and just want to highlight a couple quick things. So when compared to lower net worth individuals, I'm using non-retirement account as a proxy, individuals, as you increase your net worth levels, are more likely to have heard of those broker systems or those check systems. It's also skewed to older individuals who are less likely to have heard of it, and people that are less educated too are less likely to have heard of these. So it's skewed to those that are higher net worth, more educated, and those that are younger. So in closing, should we be intentional? Yes, financial planning consumers should, because one, they're unaware of the check systems. Like I said, 14.47 have heard of Broker Check, about 13 IAPD, 21.4 have heard of EDGAR. And so it's truly up to the financial planning industry to provide full transparency and disclosure and minimizing the asymmetry that consumers face. And even if it's just as simple as just getting a client's signature that shows that they've been given all the information before entering a financial planning relationship, I think would be a good solve for an issue that very much needs attention. And I'd just like to say to everyone, thank you for the opportunity to present. I'll switch it back now, hopefully.
We still have your screen. There we go. Okay, Blaine, thank you very much. Interesting perspective to demonstrate that ethics is not simply a personal issue, but certainly applies to organizational and industrial perspectives. Our next speaker is, and again, I'm going to apologize ahead of time, Nan Nugent, I hope. She's a research assistant and PhD candidate in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at College of Education at Texas Tech University. Her scholarly interests include both teaching and research in English as a second language teacher education, international students' educational experiences, narrative inquiry, post-colonial theory, feminist theory, and curriculum theory. Ms. Nugent, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. May I share my screen? Okay, thank you for this opportunity. My experiences of feelings of disappointment, isolation, and identity confusion during the first year navigating my doctoral program in the United States has prompted me to this research project. The review of literature showed that despite heightened research interest in the experiences of Asian international students in the United States, there has been a dearth in scholarship focused on the experiences of Vietnamese international female graduate students. These students are subject to experiential layers of power dynamics due to their intersectional identity of being a female object, a colonized, and a minoritized. The literature review also enabled me to see the possibility for the possibility of post-colonial feminist theory to better our understanding of third world women's economic, political, and gender issues. Moreover, post-colonial thinkers and third world feminists highlight the ethics of care in feminist research, as well as the power of queer storytelling in the pain of women under pressure. So therefore, I use narrative inquiry as a research methodology for this research study with the purpose to understand the lived experiences of a Vietnamese international female graduate student at a university in the United States. One distinctive feature of narrative inquiry is that the findings from the narrative analysis of data will come in the form of stories. Let me read to you some excerpts from the two stories of my findings. First story, the dumbest and the most miserable. I aspired to learn new knowledge, but I understood little of what my professor said. Some people I met seemed to admire me for being accepted to this demanding doctoral program, but they would not know how much I remained quiet in all classes. I was too shy and uncertain of my knowledge background to contribute to class discussion. Second story, fitting in. I see more international students in this university than my previous university. It makes me feel less alone, as we seem to share the same lack of white student privileges, the same limited English competence, and the same readiness to work hard. I used to see myself as an outsider at an alien village, but now I feel a sense of belonging. I am fitting in. For the discussion, we see that the student experience multiple challenges while studying at a university in the United States. First, English is not neutral, but can have the power of its oppression and exclusion at the expense of other languages. Second, the educational standards in the host institution seems to be intolerant of the students' international and cultural backgrounds, which forces her to either adapt or expelled. Third, the model minority stereotype, which flatteringly represent Asian people as monolithically high achieving, causes her to perceive herself as the dumbest, who falls short of the expectation. Finally, as the Confucian tradition she was educated in her home country teaches her to conform to interpersonal harmony, she becomes submissive to her roommate's bullying. So Overall, the study concludes that Vietnamese female graduate students' home culture, as well as stereotype toward third world women in American culture, complicate her experience. This implies that the Vietnamese graduate students should be better prepared themselves culturally and academically in order to be able to negotiate the power dynamics permeating American higher education. Lastly, the study makes the claim that host institutions purposefully or inadvertently marginalize certain groups of students. So this finding makes a contribute to the implication that host institution should consider practicing more culturally relevant teaching as well as reconsidering feminist ethics of care. That's my study. Okay, thank you for being for letting me part of this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Nugent. Certainly, we have a wealth of information here with all the papers that were submitted. We'd like to take a moment to thank everybody for their submission, and we would like to acknowledge the awards at this point. In terms of the faculty awards, our third place winner was Dr. Barrera. Congratulations, and thank you for your contribution. Our second place award was Dr. Dwayne Hoover. Dwayne, thank you. Very insightful. And our first place award was Dr. Kelly. And I do hope, Daniel, that you're doing well. I noticed your background is, shall we say, not encouraging, but with the smile on your face, I imagine you're doing better.
I'm fortunately going home in a few hours, and it's not COVID. So yeah, just a different issue, just some pain. But yeah, this I got accused of this being my Zoom background, and I'm like, no, I promise it's not. It's real.
And on the student side, our awards for the first, third place, Matthew and Joseph, Matthew Stressman and Joseph Milliken, on their paper about the student cheating. Our second place was to Blaine Pearson on the certified financial planners. And our first place award winner was Miss Nugent, Nan Nugent, and you got to correct me on how that's pronounced. But
None.
Nan, it is none.
None. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to open the floor for Q&A. As you're speaking, make sure you unmute your mic. And when you're finished speaking, I would ask that you remute it so that there's no background noise while it's being addressed. The floor is open.
Dr. Barrera, this is Ralph Ferguson, Managing Director of the Ethics Center. I'm very familiar with the question about land grants. I'm a native South Texan, south of the Nueces River. And I know in 1877 is when a lot of the land grants were basically absorbed by the Texas government. Has there been any dialogue at all through forming a committee to try to write what happened during that period of history in our country? Because there's a lot of individuals that did lose land grants that were forfeited. They were forfeited, they were just taken away. Has there been any effort to get something done to right that situation?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. You know, it's interesting. I have not seen anything since since the 1980s. And when I look back at that association, in Spanish it's the Asociación de Reclamantes, it kind of seemed to have fizzled out. And so from what I can tell, those parties who were looking for reparations really didn't get very far in the 80s, and things just kind of fizzled out. Now, there may have been more that went on, but my research has not really taken me to those places, so I haven't seen anything come of that. A lot of the individuals in New Mexico and Texas who were looking for these reparations, a lot of this began in the 60s. And then it seems to, again, it appears to have fizzled out by the 80s. And I haven't really done further research to see whether or not it resurged, but to my knowledge, it did not. And that's pretty much the best I've got. And that's simply because I have not actually gone. This is kind of a framing device that I use for this larger project. And I actually need to go to Edinburgh and look at those files. And so that's quite possibly where the answer lies, if anything further.
A lot of people don't realize this is the historical wrong that took place during this period. It was also a very bloody period.
Yep.
And there, I know that in Texas, I know, I used to know, hadn't been in South Texas in quite a while, but I used to know quite a few families that had both large and small land grants for just relocating the field of space in Texas for the Spanish government. And it's a real travesty that no one has bothered to address this. It's no different than the reparation promise the African Americans from the slave period and other groups and populations that have been detrimentally hurt by governance at a time when it was slightly wrong-headed. If no one minds, I've got another question, but I don't want to, Dr. I wanted that question, but I want to go to the foster kids and talk to Dr. One of the big issue, I had worked for years as a dean in the graduate school. And I met a lot of the foster kids that were coming through that were emancipated from the institutions and the communities. And one of the things that always stuck with me when I visited with them is that many of them felt like they had no connection. There was no connection going back to their foster community where they were, or also getting into the marketplace. And I spent a lot of hours talking to these students. Some were in law schools, some were in graduate schools, and some were undergraduates. Is there any now organizational structure that allows them to connect once they're emancipated from the foster system?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I'm a former foster kid myself, so that's why this particular population is of interest. You're right, there's not a lot of supports, and when we do try to implement those supports, we often run into foster kids as far away from the foster care system as humanly possible once they age out. So it's difficult to get them then back into that community for the support because they really don't want to be a part of it. However, it's not all students, and what we're working towards now, and actually the reason I was smiling when you asked, is myself and a professor in human development and family science services. We just reinstituted the Foster Care Student Association on campus. We just went through the training to make that a student organization again, and are looking to rebuild that community at Texas Tech. So if anybody does have students that are interested moving forward, that should be up and running in the fall once all this COVID stuff kind of dissipates.
Well, please connect with the Ethics Center.
Absolutely.
And the same thing for you, Dr. Banana. If you're extending your work and doing more, anything that we can do through the Ethics Center to support you or just simply get the word out. In our network, we have somewhere north of 2,000 to 3,000 individuals and organizations, and we don't mind passing and circulating information to support these types of initiatives. If no one else has a question, I have another question. I want to go to Pearson on this business thing of financial planning. My background in business, I built 2 businesses. One, I had 300 retailers that my company had as clients, and And I was trained in an environment at the time when, those of you may not be aware of it, that planned obsolescence was an acceptable way of doing business. And now it looks like we're looking at financial planning, which I am a financial planner. That's my graduate degree, my PhD. It seems like the acceptable way of doing business in financial planning is that because you work for an organization like, I guess like Prudential or Northwestern, there's no individual, no personal accountability. And I wanted to ask you, is this one of the reasons that there doesn't seem like disclosure works fully? Is because most of the financial planners are affiliated with institutions, and people look at when they're paying their money to a planner, they see themselves paying an institution, not an individual. Could that be addressed?
That's a really interesting sort of question. The purpose of this paper here was to show that even a large organization, the CFP board, the credentialing of the company or of the individuals that complete their CFP, are held and are supposed to be held to a high ethical standard. They have met technical competency requirements, but yet when you go to the CFP board to search for those individuals, they're not disclosing practice violations, they're not disclosing and providing full and accurate disclosure. And so if left to their own devices, you kind of have to wonder whether or not in client meetings, financial planners are, being as fully transparent, saying, yeah, I just let you know that you are, we're entering a business relationship where I have, committed an injustice in financial planning at some point, and it has been reported by the CFP board on their website. It hasn't been, I have to make it a point to say that. And then the second part of the paper was to show that, even when you try to, even the tools that are available, like the three that I presented, individuals just unaware that they exist. And so I try to make the point that it should be, and to your question, it should be up to the industry as a whole to make consumers more aware, especially with financial planning. As mentioned in my presentation, there are no licensing requirements. There are no, it's very difficult to understand the level of quality service you're getting. So, people do look to the credentialings to see whether or not they're getting something of quality. I think it's important that when they look to those credentialings like the CFP and the CFP board, that they provide full and accurate information.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Dr. Kelly, what is the name of your organization?
It should be the Foster Care Student Association, and as soon as we have that information, we will be disseminating that campus-wide.
Great, thank you.
And if I can, I did have a question for Joseph and Matthew. I did find their presentation really interesting, and we all as instructors have had our issues with cheating. But wouldn't changes in assessment correct the cheating issue more than, like, I'm a technologist, so everything's a nail, since I have that as my hammer, and I'm looking at everything. Oh, technology can solve these problems, but if we change assessment to be more robust and more project oriented, where they actually have to go through and create, doesn't that solve that problem almost entirely?
I would argue it doesn't, partially based off of some stuff I've seen. So inside my the town that my family lives in, they have the 8th graders make catapults. And so you would expect, like, hey, it's a catapult that they have to build and test out. There's no way that there could be any cheating done. One of the things that they found is that those kids will go out and pay people $200 to go out and have it professionally built. And it's not addressed because you don't want to be like, oh, this catapult looks too nice for an 8th grader to have built. So you try to be a little bit too nice. And I would say that one of the things that we found when we moved on to a lot of assessments on Blackboard and stuff, you would expect there'd be less cheating there. I can attest, and Joseph can attest to this, so please don't get our groups in trouble. There's an entire group me inside the MBA program where they constantly are posting questions and answers. So I'd argue that technology does give us some ways of combating it, but I think that technology also isn't going to be just a clear-cut solution or a silver bullet. I think that it's going to take a lot of creativity and a lot of educational outreach on our parts.
Well, that was kind of my point, is technology isn't that hammer where it's going off again, where technology isn't the hammer, but rather, like in your catapult example, having students explain how the catapult works to the instructor would be a better way of doing it, rather than just, oh, here's a catapult, does it work? But that explanation piece then creates the assessment, is where I was going with that. And I think you just busted your group me, by the way.
Yeah, I think I did too, but I think it's a fairly well-known secret inside of our group, and I think even some of the faculty has suspicions, at least I hope they do.
I think the philosophical answer to that is honestly, it's a heart problem. And I think that what we're ending up seeing is that there is a lack of motivation, especially when you have, why spend, 5 hours, working on homework that's going to be good for a test when I can just, spend 30 minutes and go on Chegg and get the answer from there. So I think where the problem really lies is in terms of really appealing to what motivates students. And I think that what the whole paper is talking about is getting students to see that long-term goal, that long-term benefit to actually putting in the work now versus taking the short route. And that's a very difficult problem to solve, because to change someone's heart, in essence, is very difficult. But I think that there are ways around that, whether that be just really creating material that really speaks to the student, that really grabs their attention. But yes.
And if I can go ahead and comment on one thing, I think that the problem with trying to do it where you have to have an explanation, I teach inside a group where we have everything be like the students explain everything. It takes forever to grade anything. So you have to have the teachers and the faculty be willing to go ahead and put forth a lot more time if you're going to have explanations and stuff like that. But I do agree with you. I think on some level, the solution is going to be a mixture of technology and then low-tech solutions that we all know what they are, but we don't want to put in the effort to actually implement them.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Let me know when you solve that problem. I think we'd all like to implement it.
Oh man, I think that would be worth money.
Well, if I could just step in and piggyback on what Matthew and Joseph, you all are talking about. One thing that I wrote as you all were talking about your paper was accessibility is key, and it's very easy for the kid to go find what he needs to pay $200 to make this catapult, right? And then also it seems to me this really larger problem of short-term gains versus long-term commitments. And, because I teach literature, part of what I try to do is, okay, how is this going to help you way, way, way down there? You're reading a story about someone, but this connects to you this has to connect to you in ways that's going to help you or speak to you in some future that maybe you see yourself in. And so to me, it seems like if somehow or another it's a societal issue, it seems to me. We are so geared towards the short-term goal rather than long-term, ethical values, right? Or long-term modes of being in the world. Did you, in your writing this or in your research, did you come across these instances where the short-term and the long-term really kind of played into, oh, I'm going to cheat because it's going to help me now, right?
That's what we basically assumed as kind of our underlying idea as to what was going on. So I don't think that we specifically read about that. I think that it's kind of mentioned almost everywhere, but it's not specific. Where I think it was really obvious was that one of the studies was talking about how like only 2% of students who admit to cheating admit to also having been caught, which suggests that that's like to them the only thing that matters is getting caught. And if only 2% of them get caught when they cheat, guess what? They're going to be like, oh, it's no big deal to cheat because there's no consequences. And so to loop back, sorry, I realized I didn't quite finish my initial thought. I think that the key thing there is that, yes, there is definitely that long-term versus short-term, and we tried to be fairly explicit about it in our paper.
Yeah, a comment I'd like to make about this, I find this interesting. I had come up with, through an education system which had the honor system, going back to my high school days, as well as in my graduate program in Stevens. And when I first came to Texas Tech, and I was prepared to teach, and I teach the organizational behavior aspects of management, the leadership and ethics and such, I had talked about an honor system, and because I was raised in a system where the instructor would put the test on the front desk and tell the students they were responsible to pick up a test and complete it and return it to the desk and then walk out of the room. I was told unceremoniously by the administration at Texas Tech, you will not do that here. And then when I pursued it with the students, it was interesting because I'm going to say it was at least 80% of the students said they're absolutely right. That's all you're doing is inviting them to cheat. And I was just amazed with that concept. And it's still, I have to admit, it bothers me some. It's similar to what Dr. Kelly was talking about before.
I've got a question for, let's see, I think this was Dr. Hoover. You were talking about the requisite variety and the levels, these 5 levels. I was fascinated by that. If you are in this, if you are in one of those later levels of understanding, can you move backwards through this depending on your economic situation? What I was curious about with regard to these levels, because I see this in a lot of the eco-social theories that I deal with in literature, you know, about having choices and environmental damage and knowledge about that. To what extent does economics or the economic situation of the individual factor into where these individuals kind of begin on these levels or end up, or kind of how they move through these levels?
Yeah, that's an important question because, see, there's 2 dimensions to what I'm trying to say here. One is the capacity to engage in ethical behavior. And the other one is the willingness to engage in ethical behavior. So you're correct. If economic situations curtail your or limit your ability to respond, you may wind up engaging in the case of pollution, I use that example, you may wind up polluting simply because the government changes the rules, and you have to be competitive in your industry, you also have to shut down your previously pollution controlling equipment. And that would be an example of environmental change that would put you back. Now, the other dimension is willingness. The example I was giving was if you're at a level 2 or level 3. Level 3 is where you know what pollution is, but you don't really have the capacity to fix it. Like I said, that's where the country was 30, 40, 50 years ago. We are now in a state where we know how to fix pollution, but some people are choosing not to do it. The government is saying pollution doesn't matter anymore, for example. Now, level 5 is where you are linked to the world you live in. And at that level, then climate change becomes critical because climate change affects the world you live in, and therefore that has to be addressed. However, we don't currently have the capacity there's a limit to our capacity to engage in climate change fixes, if you would. And then the willingness, of course, is a whole other question. There's a whole section of our American society that denies that climate's even an issue. So, and again, my solution there is enlightenment, education, awareness of alternatives or whatever. So yeah, capacity is an important part of it. Good
Thank
question.
you.
I have well, a question about resequent variety. That, to me, that would be linked to belief system. What they believe, what they don't believe, what they let in, what they don't let in, to justify their choices, their behaviors.
So is your question about how beliefs work?
Oh, no, I've lived.
Oh, okay. Just a comment. All right.
Just a comment on resequent variety and belief systems and choices, which is usually based back on economics lately in our government.
Well, that raises an interesting a dimension of, I guess you could say, nuance. Sometimes people, they have a higher level goal, and they're willing to literally do something they know is wrong or incorrect to pursue that higher level goal. In other words, the belief system, I'm not trying to be political here, but a lot of people are trying to change the court system to be more conservative, maybe even attack a woman's right to choose. People are making voting decisions that they know are probably inappropriate, but still the higher goal still drives that behavior. So, and again, you have to, and that's explainable by belief. You're right. That's a good point.
Exactly. So I would love a copy of your model.
I will send me, I'm at dwayne.hoover.ttu.
Okay.
Send me an email and I'll be happy to send it back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my paper is 15 pages long. It's hard to explain it in 5 minutes.
But very interesting.
Thank you.
It's a nice construct that does lead into the belief and the economics and the choices and down rabbit holes.
Right.
That we, the people, don't seem to think we have any choice in. We, the people, need to step up.
Well, I think one of the things that inspired me to, I've been pursuing this concept for about 20 years, but one thing that inspired me to reply to this call for papers is the statement, something like, judge not lest you be judged. I think we make a lot of snap decisions about people. Well, that's unethical. Or we more like this. How could they be so crazy as to do that? You hear that phrase a lot these days. By the way, from both sides of the political spectrum. And the answer is because their beliefs or their capacity, it constrains their ability to behave. And so if a person has heard, if a person's heard the President of the United States say that climate change isn't real, and then you talk to that person and they say, well, climate change isn't real, that's not really their fault in a sense, because their source of perspective may be incorrect. Now, a different person would be a person who says, I know there's such a thing as climate change, but if I keep my plant going this way, I can make a lot of money in the next 10 years. Screw the environment, I'm taking the money. That's unethical, because that person does have a higher requisite variety, understands that they're behaving unethically, but they don't care.
Exactly. The economics.
Okay, Dwayne, let me ask you really a question about economics, because one of the things is we have the Milton Friedman philosophy that we want to make out of every calamity, there's an opportunity. And being that we are driven by pragmatism in our financial models and even in our governance, how does that work in trying to get people to understand that there are ethical characteristics we don't want to forsake?
The assumption that one of the assumptions of your question is that somehow or other people understand that this thing is not ethical. I'll give you an example that popped in mind while the last person was asking me a question. Current situation with manufacturing masks for people to use to ward off COVID-19. There are a lot of people that are sacrificing themselves to make masks to help people. And there are other people that are going way out to make lots of extra masks, quadrupling the price and essentially engaging in war profiteering. In both cases, the behavior observed is, oh, these people are making more masks. But if you look at the motive behind it, you find that it's a different motive. So I think most people, but probably most people in this conference would agree that we need to save as many lives as possible. And if masks are the way to do that, then let's make more masks. And yet there are people who would say, yeah, but that's an opportunity just to make more money. So again, you have to, the assumption is that everybody, that's like I said, judge not lest you be judged, because sometimes people are engaging in behaviors that they perceive as ethical and other people would perceive as unethical. That answer your question?
Well, in part, but when we look at how do we align the values of pragmatism to doing things that where the positive ethical characteristic is to serve, not to gain.
Right.
And that is an economics question. The only one school of economics would say that the only decision you make is a decision that maximizes profit. All other decisions are irrelevant. What you're implying is that we try to make profits, comma, but there's also considerations of service as you're doing that. So a company that, a good example would be the companies that manufacture shoes. Every time you buy a pair of shoes, they donate a pair of shoes to a developed country where there aren't any shoes. That enables them to do both things. They can be socially responsible and responsive, and at the same time, that particular company happens to make a pretty good profit because they sell lots of shoes. But those examples are thin on the ground. They're not many more examples of people doing not the opposite of that as opposed to doing that. But if that model were to be imitated more, and now we're talking about modeling behavior. If you have leadership that models a behavior that is both service-oriented and pragmatic, then people will imitate that, hopefully. And that's like I said, enlightenment is one of the solutions to this dilemma. But enlightenment, in case you haven't noticed, is quite difficult sometimes.
Quite difficult. But that's what I was saying earlier when I was doing my graduate work in management, the planned obsolescence concept was acceptable. That was one of the things that worked. When you graduate from the university, your job is to go to a company and make a profit and see that your stockholders get a dividend. And I don't know that we've changed our instructional values in business schools since the time I was in a business school 20 or 30 years ago. Your thoughts?
Well, I've taught that same course that Mike teaches, leadership and ethics, and I find that there's a certain percentage, I won't name the percentage, but there's a certain percentage of students, graduate MBA business school students, who consider the ethical part of the course as a waste of time. It's irrelevant, and view something like organizational behavior as one of those kind of BS-y, touchy-feely courses that you just have to take to get your MBA degree, but it doesn't really matter. Now that's not the majority, but there is a group in the business school environment, if you would, who aren't really that interested in ethics, because ethics makes up the equation, and they want the more straightforward thing. So yeah, that philosophy hasn't gone away, but I'd say it's not dominant anymore. Well, I would say it was not dominant 8-10 years ago. I see it coming back now, so we'll see what happens.
Have you done research on those classes, polled those classes, and have some statistics on? I'd be very interested to read that as far as the business students who think that course is irrelevant. I would love to have those figures.
You're not gonna like what I say now, but yes, I used to poll those things, and I got horrible teaching evaluations. Like really horrible teaching evaluations. That's why I don't teach that course anymore, because my evaluations were so low, because I was examining those kind of issues, and it irritated the students. The funny line is, never try to teach a pig to sing. First, it's a waste of time, and eventually it will annoy the pig. And so I was pushing that. I was interested in that area, just like you are. But I found that the more I talked about it, the less interested they were in pursuing it.
Yes, and I'm sure it made some very uncomfortable.
Right.
Challenge their belief systems.
Right.
That's unfortunate, but I think such statistics needs to be known to enlighten and make them face it, whether they want to or not, and then let them choose. Once they know, they know. What you said earlier, people don't know what they don't know, they didn't know. I teach my students that all the time. I can't say that enough to get them to go, aha, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but they have to be interested in having that aha moment. And if they're not interested in having that moment, it's very difficult to get it through.
And amen.
Yeah. I think to this point, and this is one of the things I emphasize a lot in this class, is going back to the whole question about belief systems and whatever. A lot of times I emphasize with the students that it's not going to be acceptable to me to tell me that this is ethical because their pastor, their parents, their grandparents, their sister, their teacher said it was ethical. I want them to investigate what they think and dive into it. And to Dwayne's point, that scares the hell out of them, and a lot of times will have an effect on how they perceive you as the teacher.
Correct.
But how else will they get there?
That's the challenge.
That's the challenge. Let's put it, if I was an assistant professor without tenure, I never would have tried that, to be quite honest. As a person with tenure, I thought I'd give it a go. But again, that's a risk factor in terms of the environment we sometimes work in.
Yes.
I think the innate human tendency is to be comfortable. And when you disrupt a person's comfort, which includes beliefs and other things, they react to that discomfort. And one of the ways to get high teaching evaluations, for example, is to never say anything or examine anything that makes students uncomfortable. But the courses I teach in organizational behavior are about personal development and change. If you're going to personally develop and change, or what we call transformative change, to engage in transformative change, you actually have to transform. And that's uncomfortable, but important.
At this point, I'm assuming we're closing out the Q&A, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Ferguson.
Dr. Patterson.
Thank you. I will make some final remarks. I want to thank everybody who participated today. I found all the talks very enlightening. The research was terrific. And as I listen to these, it reminds me not only how far we've come, but where we need to go. These kinds of things need to continue. And so what I want to do is just give you a few, just a quick listing of the kinds of things that we're working on now, Dr. Ferguson, myself. And again, I want to thank the Ethics Center staff. Absolutely marvelous job. It's really a pleasure to be part of an organization that just works so well, especially in these very, very uncertain and trying times that we all face. We've gone from a campus resource to a true degree certificate granting institution. That's one of our goals. We're a great resource on campus. There's all kinds of videos and resources that students and faculty can tap into to deal with ethical issues. But one of our goals is to begin offering continuing education credits in ethics for professionals. And we're working on that. I'm in the provost office, and I am the academic director, program director for Texas Tech's satellite campuses. I reside in the Metroplex. I've been at Texas Tech for 17 years now, but I'm running our campuses primarily in the Metroplex, but also in Hill Country and in Waco and in between. We've got a number of campuses. So one of our goals is to build the center into a credential continuing ed kind of organization to make it beyond just a campus resource. Also, one of the other things we want to do is as Dr. Ferguson mentioned earlier today, to be a true producer of intellectual content. We've got great things like this. We got our e-journal, and there's really two parts to that we're trying to work on. One of them is to expand our programs that we already do. We have a wonderful program that we started a few years back called Race in America, a Problem of Ethics, and we brought in prominent African-American scholars, including the individual who was the main character, and if you've seen the film Hotel Rwanda, Paul Rusesabagina lives in San Antonio, although he does spend his time in Belgium as well, as I understand. And he came to campus, and we had a wonderful time with him and other things like that. And we want to continue that. We unfortunately, our program was canceled this year because the individual we were thinking of, who runs a certified National Cancer Institute in Virginia these days, was just not able to get here. And he's one of 2 African Americans that actually run such a certified cancer institute. So we're working on these things, and we're going to really continue to do those kinds of things. And this is where the think tank idea comes in. That's a real producer of intellectual content. When we do position papers, we do white papers and things like this, and we'll continue this. And one more thing is, we've got the wonderful e-journal. This year, we're going to talk about making where we, it's a wonderful resource for publication for what we do at Texas Tech on our campus in Lubbock. But we're thinking about bringing this to a much wider national, international audience by working with the publisher to make a real, actual, both in-print, online journal. And that's another plan. And you'll be hearing more about this as we move on and get through this crisis. So my final point is to thank everyone, but if anybody's got any ideas, please contact myself or Dr. Ferguson, because we're always open to ideas to make these things happen.
And
thank you.
Your email is?
Dennis.Patterson, Patterson, @ttu.edu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, again, let me reiterate my appreciation to all the submissions, people that submitted their papers for review, and Dr. Ryan and all the judges, as well as the staff. We are evolving in our Ethics Center. I think that Texas Tech faculty several years ago, when they configured the Ethics Center as being an energy and a messaging agency on campus to encourage and promote ethics, they established a marvelous idea, and we will continue to evolve it. And the Ethics Center has gotten tremendous amount of prominence. We've been invited to national meetings to talk about our strategies and our techniques for outreach. We've engaged across our campus, pretty much all disciplines. So the future looks very bright for us, and we want to continue to involve different disciplines with different projects. And as we talked about earlier, I mentioned it earlier, and Dr. Patterson just mentioned, we see ourselves evolving into a think tank where we can take and pull together the various researchers and come up with white papers that will present ideas and thoughts that will further expand the need and understanding of ethics and its importance. So, with nothing else being said, Ms. Lopez, anyone else on the staff, if anyone else has remarks, if there are no other remarks, thank you, and we're done for the day. And you should be able to find this Zoom presentation in full length, Ms. Lopez, where?
Once it's edited, we will send out a link to everyone that is on here. And we will also post it on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Feel free to follow us and like our pages.
Thank you. Have a good day, and I appreciate the program. It was very good. And thank you again for all the papers that we were able to read and review. And also, we did not tell what the first, second place awards were, or did we?
The award amounts are $500 for first place, $300 for second place, and $200 for third place.
Okay. And we'll be in touch. Thank you. Have a good day.